It is 2:47 in the morning on March 12th, 2026, and I cannot sleep. I have been sitting at this desk for the last 4 hours with my Bible open to Revelation chapter 8, and I need to tell you what I found, because what I found is not what I expected. And I genuinely think that if you are watching this right now, you were supposed to find this tonight. Let me tell you what stopped me cold. I was not looking for this. I was doing a routine cross-reference study on the blood moon sequence we just passed through, trying to understand what comes after the signs in the sky. Joel chapter 2, Revelation chapter 6, Matthew chapter 24. I had all three open at the same time, and I was moving through them the way I always do, looking for the threads that connect. And then I hit Revelation chapter 8 verse 1, and I just stopped. I stopped because of one word, not a dramatic word, not a terrifying word, a quiet word. And that quiet word, when you trace it back through the original Greek, when you understand what it actually means in the context of what just happened in the previous chapter, it changes everything about how we read this moment in history. Here is what Revelation chapter 8 verse 1 says, and I am going to read it slowly because I need you to actually hear it. It says, "And when he had opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven about the space of half an hour, silence, after everything, after the six seals, after the blood moon, after the stars falling and the sky rolling back like a scroll, after kings and commanders hiding in caves and crying out for the mountains to fall on them. After all of that, heaven goes silent." And I want to ask you something before we go any further. When is the last time you sat in silence and actually asked yourself what comes next? Not what you hope comes next, not what your church told you comes next, what the text actually says comes next. Because I think a lot of us have been so focused on the signs, the blood moons, the earthquakes, the wars, the things that are visible and loud and undeniable, that we have completely missed what the silence means. And the silence, I am going to show you tonight, is the most terrifying and the most important moment in the entire sequence. If you have been following the blood moon conversations happening right now, if you have been watching what is unfolding in the Middle East, if you have been feeling that something has shifted in the spiritual atmosphere and you cannot quite name it, I need you to stay with me for the next hour, because what I am about to walk you through from Revelation 8, from Daniel chapter 8, and from a warning that Irenaeus of Lyon wrote in the 2nd century that almost nobody is talking about right now, it is going to reframe everything you thought you understood about where we are on the prophetic timeline. And I want to be honest with you up front, I am not a prophet. I am not claiming a vision. I am a person who reads the text, who cross-references the text, who traces the original languages back to what the words actually meant before they were translated and softened and made comfortable for modern ears. And what I found in the text tonight is not comfortable. So let me ask you this right now. Tell me in the comments, have you ever actually studied what happens after the sixth seal in Revelation? Because I had read this passage dozens of times, and I had completely missed what the silence is telling us. If this is new to you tonight, I need to know. Drop something in the comments right now, because what I am about to show you builds on itself, and I want to know who is hearing this for the first time. Now, let me give you the framework before we go into the numbered sequence, because the framework is everything. The book of Revelation is not a random collection of visions. It is a structured legal document. It is the unsealing of a heavenly scroll that was described in Ezekiel chapter 2 and in Daniel chapter 12. And the structure matters because the structure tells you the sequence. The seals are not metaphors. They are not symbols of general spiritual conditions throughout church history. They are sequential events. And the seventh seal does not just introduce the trumpets. The seventh seal is the hinge point. It is the moment between what has been and what is about to be unleashed, and heaven goes silent. Now here's the first thing I need you to understand, and this is where the Greek becomes critical. The word translated as silence in Revelation 8 verse 1 is the Greek word CG, spelled sigma, iota, gamma, ete. And CG does not just mean quiet. It does not mean a pause or a rest. In the Greek legal and ceremonial tradition, CG was the silence that preceded a verdict. It was the silence of a courtroom the moment before the judge speaks. It was the silence of a temple the moment before the high priest emerged from the Holy of Holies. This is not a peaceful silence. This is a loaded silence. This is the silence of something enormous about to happen. And when you cross-reference that with what Daniel chapter 8 verse 17 says, when the angel Gabriel appears to Daniel and Daniel falls on his face, and Gabriel says to him, "Understand, O Son of Man, for at the time of the end shall be the vision." You start to see the pattern. The silence in heaven is not a pause in the action. The silence in heaven is the moment when the action shifts from the visible realm to the invisible realm. It is the moment when heaven draws breath before the next movement begins. And the next movement is 7 trumpets. Now I want to walk you through 5 things that Revelation chapter 8 reveals about this silence and what it means for right now. 5 things that I found in the text tonight that I have never heard preached, never heard taught, and never seen connected the way they connect when you lay the original language alongside the cross references. And I am going to tell you right now that the 5th one is the one that stopped me. The 5th one is the one I am still processing. I am going to hold it until we get there, because if I tell you now, you will not understand the weight of it without the first 4. But I need you to know it is coming. Because the 5th connection between Revelation 8, Daniel chapter 9, and something Irenaeus wrote that has been sitting in the historical record for 1800 years, it is the kind of thing that makes you put your face in your hands and just sit there. So let us start with the first thing. The first thing the silence reveals is that heaven is watching. Look at what happens in Revelation chapter 8, verses 3 and 4, and I am going to read this carefully. It says, "And another angel came and stood at the altar, having a golden censer, and there was given unto him much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all saints upon the golden altar, which was before the throne. And the smoke of the incense, which came with the prayers of the saints, ascended up before God out of the angel's hand." Do you see what is happening here? During the silence, while heaven holds its breath, an angel is standing at the altar with a golden censer. And what is in that censer? The prayers of the saints. Your prayers. The prayers of every person who has ever cried out to God in the middle of the night and wondered if anyone was listening. Those prayers are being gathered. They are being offered. They are ascending before the throne of God during the silence. This is not incidental detail. This is the text telling you something specific about the nature of this moment. The silence is not emptiness. The silence is the moment when God is receiving the accumulated prayers of his people before he acts, before the trumpets sound, before the next sequence begins. He is holding the prayers of his saints in his hands. And I want you to sit with that for a moment, because if we are in the season that the signs are pointing to, if the blood moons and the geopolitical alignments and the spiritual atmosphere are telling us something real, then the silence is not a sign that God has gone quiet. The silence is a sign that God is listening, that he has been listening, that every prayer you have prayed in the dark, every cry you have sent up when you did not know if you could keep going, those prayers are in the censer. They are before the throne. Now here is where the cross-reference becomes extraordinary. Turn to Psalm 141, verse 2. David writes, "Let my prayer be set forth before thee as incense, and the lifting up of my hands as the evening sacrifice." David, writing 1,000 years before Revelation, is describing the same image, prayer as incense, prayer ascending before the throne. And then in Luke chapter 1, verse 10, when the angel appears to Zechariah in the temple, it says the whole multitude of the people were praying without at the time of incense. The incense offering was the moment of prayer. It was the moment when the people outside the temple lifted their voices while the priest stood before God inside. 3 texts, 1 image, prayer ascending as incense before the throne during a moment of holy silence before something changes. This is the first thing the silence reveals. Heaven is not absent. Heaven is receiving. Now, the second thing the silence reveals is harder to sit with, and this is where I need you to stay with me, because this is where the text gets uncomfortable. The second thing the silence reveals is that the silence has a duration. Revelation 8, verse 1 says, "The silence lasted about the space of half an hour," and I know that sounds like a small detail, but nothing in Revelation is a small detail. Every measurement, every number, every duration in this book is intentional. So what does half an hour mean? Now, I want to be careful here. I am not going to give you a date calculation and tell you, I know exactly when this happens. That is not what the text is doing, and it is not what I am doing. But what I can show you is what the half hour communicates in the context of the heavenly temple structure that Revelation is built on. In the Jerusalem temple, the daily incense offering lasted approximately half an hour. The priest would enter the Holy of Holies, offer the incense, and the people outside would wait in silence for about half an hour before he emerged. That half hour was the most sacred interval in the entire daily temple service. It was the interval between the offering and the response, between the prayer and the answer, between the silence and the sound. And when you cross-reference that with Hebrews chapter 9, verses 23 through 24, where the writer tells us that the earthly tabernacle was a copy and shadow of the heavenly one, you understand that the half hour of silence in Revelation 8 is not a random duration. It is the heavenly fulfillment of the earthly temple pattern. It is the interval between the prayers of the saints being offered and the response of God being released. And the response, when it comes, is not gentle. Revelation 8 verse 5 says, "And the angel took the censer and filled it with fire of the altar and cast it into the earth, and there were voices and thunderings and lightnings and an earthquake." The same censer that held the prayers of the saints is filled with fire and cast to the earth. The prayers become the fire. The intercession becomes the judgment. And I need you to understand what that means. It means the judgments that follow are not arbitrary. They are not random acts of divine wrath. They are the answer to the prayers of the saints. They are the response to every cry for justice, every prayer for the kingdom to come, every voice that has ever said, "How long, O Lord, how long?" This is where I need to pause and tell you something. When I read that verse tonight, I had to stop. I had to put the Bible down and just breathe, because I have prayed that prayer. I have said, "How long, O Lord?" And the text is telling me that those prayers are in the censer, that they are part of what is being offered before the throne right now, and that the silence is the moment before the answer arrives. Are you still with me? Because we are only at the second of 5 things, and the weight of what comes next is going to require everything you have built up in the first 2. So let me take you to the third thing the silence reveals. And this is where I need to bring in a voice that most people in the modern church have never heard. A voice that has been sitting in the historical record for 1800 years, waiting for someone to connect it to this passage. His name is Irenaeus of Lyon, and I need to tell you who this man was before I tell you what he wrote, because his credentials matter. Irenaeus was the bishop of Lyon in the 2nd century. He was a direct disciple of Polycarp of Smyrna. And Polycarp, before he was martyred, was a personal disciple of the Apostle John, the same John who wrote the book of Revelation. So when Irenaeus writes about the end times, he is not speculating. He is not doing what I am doing tonight, sitting at a desk at 2 in the morning with a concordance and a Greek lexicon. He is transmitting what he received from a man who sat at the feet of the apostle who saw the vision. That is a chain of custody that the modern church has almost entirely forgotten. And here is what Irenaeus wrote in his work called Against Heresies, Book 5, Chapter 30. He wrote this: "The predicted blessing, therefore, belongs unquestionably to the times of the kingdom, when the righteous shall bear rule upon their rising from the dead, when also the creation, having been renovated and set free, shall fructify with an abundance of all kinds of food, from the dew of heaven and from the fertility of the earth." Now I know that sounds like it is about the millennium and not about the silence, but stay with me, because 2 chapters later, in Book 5, Chapter 32, Irenaeus writes something that connects directly to what we are looking at in Revelation 8. He writes about the sequence of events leading to the kingdom, and he says this: "John therefore did distinctly foresee the first resurrection of the just, and the inheritance in the kingdom of the earth. And what the prophets have predicted concerning it shall be gradually accomplished." Gradually accomplished. That phrase stopped me tonight, because the word gradually in the Latin text that Irenaeus was working from carries the sense of in ordered sequence, step by step, according to a predetermined pattern. Irenaeus is saying that the prophetic fulfillment is not a single event, it is a sequence, and the sequence has a structure, and the structure includes intervals, pauses, silences. He understood 1800 years ago that the silence in Revelation 8 was not a gap in the narrative. It was a structural element of the sequence. It was the ordered pause between one phase of fulfillment and the next. And here is why that matters for right now. Because we live in a culture, and honestly in a church culture, that wants everything to happen at once. We want the signs and the rapture and the judgment and the kingdom all in one dramatic moment. But Irenaeus, who learned from Polycarp, who learned from John, is telling us that it does not work that way. It is gradual, it is sequential, it is ordered, and the silence is part of the order. The third thing the silence reveals is that God moves in sequence, not in chaos. And the sequence has a silence built into it, a deliberate, purposeful, loaded silence. And if we are in that silence right now, if the signs that have been accumulating are the 6th seal events and we are now in the interval before the trumpets, then the most important thing we can do is not panic. It is not to run. It is to be like the people standing outside the temple during the incense offering, to be in position, to be praying, to be ready for when the priest emerges. Now I want to stop here for a moment and be honest with you about something, because I know there are people watching this who are skeptical, and I respect that. I was skeptical too, sitting here tonight. When I first started pulling these threads together, I kept asking myself, am I reading into this? Am I connecting things that are not meant to be connected? Am I doing the thing that I criticize other people for doing, which is forcing the text to say what I want it to say? So I went back to the Greek. I went back to the original language of Revelation 8, and I want to show you something that the English translation almost entirely obscures. The phrase translated as about the space of half an hour in Revelation 8 verse 1 is in the Greek hos hemiorion, spelled eta, mu, iota, omega, rho, iota, omicron, nu, and the word hemiorian is only used once in the entire New Testament. Right here, this is the only place this word appears, which means John chose it deliberately. He did not use a more common word for a short period of time. He used this specific word, hemiorian, half an hour, but here is what the Greek reveals that the English does not. The prefix hemi means half, but it also carries the connotation of incompleteness, of something that is half of what it will become. The silence is not just half an hour in duration, it is half of something. It is the first half of a two-part movement. The silence is the inhale before the exhale, the gathering before the release, the half that precedes the whole. And when you cross-reference that with Daniel chapter 9, verse 27, where Daniel describes the final week being divided in half, the middle of the week, the hemi of the week, you see the same structural pattern, a period divided in half, a silence in the middle, a before and an after, a gathering and a release. This is not coincidence. This is the same divine author using the same structural language across 600 years of prophetic writing to tell us that the silence is not an interruption of the sequence. The silence is the midpoint of the sequence, the hinge, the half that divides what was from what is coming, and what is coming after the silence is the fourth thing I need to show you tonight. The fourth thing the silence reveals is what the trumpets are actually announcing. Now, most people who have studied Revelation know that the seven trumpets follow the seventh seal, and most people have a general sense that the trumpets involve catastrophic events: hail and fire, a burning mountain cast into the sea, a star called wormwood falling on the waters, the sun and moon darkened by a third. These are the things people focus on, the dramatic, visible, catastrophic events. But I want to show you something that almost nobody talks about when they teach the trumpets. I want to show you what the trumpets are in the context of the Old Testament pattern that John is drawing from, because John did not invent the trumpet imagery, he inherited it. And when you understand where he inherited it from, the trumpets become something entirely different from what most people think they are. Turn to Numbers chapter 10. This is one of the most overlooked chapters in the entire Old Testament when it comes to prophetic study. In Numbers chapter 10, God gives Moses specific instructions about the use of silver trumpets, and the instructions are detailed and they are specific: 2 trumpets, different blasts for different purposes, a long blast to gather the assembly, a short blast to signal movement, a battle alarm that is different from a gathering call. And then look at verse 9. It says, "And if ye go to war in your land against the enemy that oppresseth you, then ye shall blow an alarm with the trumpets, and ye shall be remembered before the Lord your God, and ye shall be saved from your enemies." The trumpets are not just announcements of judgment. The trumpets are a call to be remembered before God. They are a signal that activates divine remembrance and divine intervention. When the trumpet sounds, God acts on behalf of his people. Now cross-reference that with 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 16 and 17, and I need you to hear this passage tonight with fresh ears. Paul writes, "For the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trump of God, and the dead in Christ shall rise first. Then we which are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds, to meet the Lord in the air, and so shall we ever be with the Lord." The trump of God. The trumpet that signals the catching away, the rapture, the moment when those who belong to him are gathered to him. This is not separate from the trumpet sequence in Revelation. This is the fulfillment of the Numbers chapter 10 pattern. The trumpet sounds. God remembers his people. His people are gathered, and then the battle begins. And here is what I need you to understand about the sequence. The silence comes first, the prayers are gathered, the censer is filled, and then the trumpet sounds. And the trumpet that sounds is not just a signal of judgment on the earth. It is a signal of gathering for those who are ready. It is the sound that the people standing outside the temple have been waiting for. The sound that tells them the priest has emerged. The sound that tells them the interval is over and the response has come. I want to stop here and ask you something directly. Are you ready for that sound? Not in a theoretical sense, not in a I go to church and I believe in Jesus sense. I mean, are you actually ready? Is your heart right with God tonight? Because the silence, if we are in it, does not last forever. The hemiorion ends. The half becomes whole. And what follows the silence is not more silence. And listen, if what I just showed you from the Numbers chapter 10 pattern and the 1 Thessalonians connection hit you the way it hit me tonight, I need you to do something right now. Hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Not for me, because every person who engages with this video is the difference between this reaching someone who needs to hear it tonight and it disappearing into an algorithm where nobody finds it. And what I am about to show you in the fifth connection, the one I have been holding since the opening, the one between Revelation 8 and Daniel chapter 9, and what Irenaeus wrote that I have not told you yet, you need to be here for that. So subscribe right now and let us keep going. Because the fourth thing the silence reveals is that the trumpets are not just judgment. They are the answer to the prayers in the censer. They are the activation of divine remembrance. They are the sound that the watching, praying, ready people have been waiting for. And they are coming after the silence ends. Now, I need to show you something about the contrast between two kinds of people in this passage, because Revelation 8 does not just describe what happens in heaven during the silence. It implies, through the structure of the surrounding chapters, two completely different responses to the signs that precede the silence. Look at what happens in Revelation chapter 6, verses 15 through 17, the verses that immediately precede the silence. The kings of the earth, and the great men, and the rich men, and the chief captains, and the mighty men, and every bondman, and every free man, hid themselves in the dens and in the rocks of the mountains, and said to the mountains and rocks, Fall on us, and hide us from the face of him that sitteth on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of his wrath is come, and who shall be able to stand? Who shall be able to stand? That is the question the text asks at the end of chapter 6. And then chapter 7 answers it before the silence begins. Chapter 7 shows us the 144,000 sealed from the tribes of Israel, and then the great multitude that no man could number from every nation and kindred and people and tongue, standing before the throne, clothed in white robes with palms in their hands. Two groups, two responses to the same signs. One group hiding in caves, crying for the mountains to fall on them. One group standing before the throne in white robes. The difference is not intelligence. The difference is not access to information. Both groups saw the same signs. Both groups knew something was happening. The difference is what they did with what they saw. One group ran from the face of the one on the throne. One group ran toward it. And I want to ask you, with everything I have shown you tonight, which group are you in right now? Not which group do you want to be in. Which group are you actually in? Because the silence is the last interval, the hemiorion, the half that precedes the whole. And when it ends, the question of who shall be able to stand will have its answer. The narrator in me wants to stop here and just let that land, but I cannot stop here. Because the fifth thing, the connection I have been holding, the one that made me put my face in my hands tonight, it builds directly on this contrast. And you need to understand the weight of the first four before the fifth one hits you the way it hit me. So stay with me, because we are about to go somewhere in the text that I have never seen anyone go. And when we get there, I think you are going to understand why I am still awake at 2:47 in the morning. Here's the fifth thing, and I need you to understand that I have been sitting with this for 3 hours before I felt ready to say it out loud. Go to Daniel chapter 9. Not the famous 70 weeks prophecy, though we are going to touch that. Go specifically to verses 20 through 23. This is the passage where the angel Gabriel comes to Daniel while Daniel is praying, and I want you to notice the timing. Daniel says, And while I was speaking and praying and confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, and presenting my supplication before the Lord my God for the holy mountain of my God, yea, while I was speaking in prayer, even the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in the vision at the beginning, being caused to fly swiftly, touched me about the time of the evening oblation. The evening oblation, do you know what that is? That is the evening incense offering, the same offering we saw in Revelation 8, the same half hour of silence, the same moment when the prayers of the saints ascend before the throne. Gabriel arrives at the exact moment of the incense offering. He arrives during the silence. He arrives during the interval between the prayer and the answer. And what does he say to Daniel? Verse 23. He says, At the beginning of thy supplications the commandment came forth, and I am come to show thee, for thou art greatly beloved. Therefore understand the matter, and consider the vision. At the beginning of thy supplications the commandment came forth. I need you to hear that. Before Daniel finished praying, before the prayer was even complete, the commandment had already gone out. The answer was already in motion. The angel was already flying. The silence was not a sign that God had not heard. The silence was the interval during which the answer was already on its way. And now I want you to hold that image. Daniel praying during the evening oblation. Gabriel flying swiftly toward him. The commandment already issued before the prayer ended. And now go back to Revelation 8, verse 3. The angel standing at the altar with the golden censer, offering the prayers of the saints before the throne. And then verse 5. the angel filling the censer with fire and casting it to the earth, the same pattern, prayer ascending during the silence, commandment going forth during the silence, answer arriving after the silence ends. But here is the connection that stopped me cold tonight. Here is the thing I have never seen anyone put together. In Daniel chapter 9, verse 24, Gabriel gives Daniel the famous 70 weeks prophecy. 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city, to finish the transgression, and to make an end of sins, and to make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. 70 weeks. Most scholars agree that 69 of those weeks have been fulfilled. The final week, the 70th week, is the period that remains. The period that Daniel chapter 9, verse 27 describes as being divided in half. The hemi, the half. The same structural word we found in Revelation 8, verse 1. And here is what Irenaeus wrote about this. In Against Heresies, Book 5, Chapter 25, he writes this, "But when this Antichrist shall have devastated all things in this world, he will reign for 3 years and 6 months, and sit in the temple at Jerusalem. And then the Lord will come from heaven in the clouds in the glory of the Father, sending this man and those who follow him into the lake of fire, but bringing in for the righteous the times of the kingdom, 3 years and 6 months, half of 7 years, the hemi of the final week, the half that precedes the whole." Irenaeus, writing in the 2nd century, drawing directly from what he received through Polycarp from John, is describing the same structural pattern that we find in Revelation 8, verse 1. The silence is the hemi, the half hour is the half week. The interval between the prayers ascending and the fire descending is the same interval between the midpoint of the final week and the coming of the Lord. Now, I want to be careful here. I am not telling you that the half hour of silence in Revelation 8 is literally equal to 3.5 years in prophetic time. I am not giving you a date calculation. What I am showing you is a structural pattern, a divine signature, the same author using the same language, the same imagery, the same hemi-structure across Daniel and Revelation and the writings of the man who learned from the man who learned from John. 3 witnesses, 3 texts, 1 pattern. And the pattern says this: there is a silence, the silence is a half. The half is an interval between what has been and what is coming, and during the silence the prayers of the saints are before the throne, and the commandment has already gone forth, and the answer is already on its way. I had to put my Bible down when I saw that. I am not exaggerating. I sat here in the dark for probably 20 minutes, just processing what the convergence of those 3 texts was saying, because if the pattern is real, and I believe it is real, then the silence is not a sign of divine absence. The silence is a sign of divine preparation. It is the moment when everything is being made ready, when the censer is being filled, when the angel is flying swiftly, when the commandment has already gone forth and the answer is already in motion. And I want to ask you something that I think is the most important question of this entire investigation. If the silence is the interval between the signs and the response, and if we are in that interval right now, what are you doing with the silence? Because here is what the text shows us about the people who were ready. They were not hiding in caves. They were not explaining away the signs. They were standing. They were praying. They were in position. They were the ones whose prayers were in the censer. They were the ones whose supplications had already triggered the commandment going forth. And here is what the text shows us about the people who were not ready. They saw the same signs. They felt the same shift in the atmosphere. They knew something was happening, but they ran from it instead of toward it. They asked the mountains to fall on them instead of asking the one on the throne to receive them. And I genuinely think that this is the condition of a large portion of the church right now, not the world. The church. Because the world does not know what the signs mean, but the church does, or the church should. And yet so much of what calls itself the church right now is doing exactly what the kings and commanders did in Revelation 6. It is explaining away the signs. It is making the blood moons into astronomy lessons. It is making the geopolitical alignments into political commentary. It is taking the most urgent prophetic moment in living memory and turning it into content. And I say that knowing that I am making content right now. I say that with full awareness of the tension, because I am not exempt from this critique. None of us are. The question is whether the content is pointing people toward the one on the throne or away from him. Irenaeus understood something that the modern church has largely lost. He understood that the prophetic sequence is not primarily information, it is an invitation. The 70 weeks prophecy was not given to Daniel so that Daniel could calculate dates. It was given to Daniel while he was praying during the evening oblation because Daniel was already in position. Daniel was already in the silence. Daniel was already the kind of person whose prayers were in the censer. And Gabriel said to him, "Thou art greatly beloved, therefore understand the matter." The understanding came because of the position. The revelation came because of the prayer. The commandment went forth because the supplication had already ascended. And I want to say something to the church right now that I think Irenaeus would say if he were standing here. The church must return to what the first Christians understood. The early believers did not treat the prophetic sequence as a spectator sport. They did not watch the signs from a distance and debate the timeline. They lived inside the urgency. They prayed with the kind of intensity that put their prayers in the censer. They stood before the throne in white robes because they had already surrendered everything that would have kept them hiding in caves. And what we have lost, what has been buried under centuries of comfortable Christianity and institutional religion and theological debate about timelines, is the posture. The posture of Daniel during the evening oblation. The posture of the great multitude in Revelation 7 standing before the throne. The posture of people who know that the silence is not empty and that the commandment has already gone forth and that the answer is already on its way. Tell me in the comments right now, which of these three connections hit you the hardest tonight? Was it the Greek word hemiorion and what it reveals about the structure of the silence? Was it the Daniel chapter 9 connection to the evening oblation and Gabriel arriving during the prayer? Or was it what Irenaeus wrote about the 3.5 years and the hemi of the final week? Tell me which one landed, because the one that moved you most is probably the one God is using to speak to you right now. And what comes next in this investigation, the preparation steps, the specific things the text tells us to do during the silence, builds directly on whichever of those three threads is alive in you tonight. Because here's what I need you to understand before we go into the final section. The silence is not passive. The silence is not a waiting room. The silence is the most active moment in the entire sequence. It is the moment when the prayers are being gathered, when the censer is being filled, when the angel is flying, when the commandment is already in motion, and the people who are ready for what comes after the silence are not the people who figured out the timeline. They are not the people who correctly identified which seal we are in or which trumpet is next. They are the people who are in position during the silence, the people who are praying, the people who are standing, the people who are watching, the people whose prayers are in the censer. And I want to be honest with you about something before we go into the preparation steps, because I think there is a version of watching this video that feels like preparation but is not actually preparation. There is a version of consuming prophetic content, watching the signs, tracking the blood moons, following the geopolitical developments that gives you the feeling of being ready without actually putting you in position. Daniel was not ready because he knew the prophecy of Jeremiah. He knew the prophecy of Jeremiah. He had read it. He understood it. But what put him in position was not the knowledge. It was the prayer. It was the fasting. It was the sackcloth and ashes. It was the confession of sin. It was the supplication. It was the posture of a man who had taken the knowledge and let it drive him to his knees. And that is the difference between the two groups in Revelation 6 and 7. Not knowledge, posture. So as we go into the final section, I want you to ask yourself honestly, not what do you know about the prophetic sequence, but what is your posture during the silence? Are you in position? Are your prayers in the censer? Is your heart right with God tonight? Because the hemiorion ends, the half becomes whole, the silence breaks. And when it breaks, the question of who shall be able to stand will have its answer. And I want that answer to be you. I want that answer to be everyone watching this right now. I want the prayers you pray tonight to be in that censer. I want you to be standing before the throne in white robes when the trumpet sounds. And so the final section of this investigation is not more information. It is a map, a specific text-anchored map of what the silence requires of us right now, what Daniel did during the evening oblation, what the great multitude did to get to where they were standing in Revelation 7, what the early church understood about living inside the urgency that we have largely forgotten. And I'm going to give you 5 specific steps, not generic spiritual advice, not a list of things that sound good. 5 steps that come directly out of the texts we have been studying tonight, anchored to what the silence is telling us to do right now, in this interval, before the commandment that has already gone forth arrives at its destination. It is now 4:19 in the morning. I have been at this desk for over 5 hours, and I want to give you these 5 steps the way Daniel received the vision, not as information to be filed away, as a charge, as a commission, as the specific response that the silence is calling out of you right now. The first step is to enter the silence intentionally. I know that sounds almost too simple, but I need you to understand what I mean by it in the context of everything we have studied tonight. The silence in Revelation 8 is not something that happens to the saints. It is something the saints are already living inside of when it occurs. The great multitude in Revelation 7 is already standing before the throne before the seventh seal is opened. They are already in position. They did not scramble to get ready when the silence began. They were already there. And the way you enter the silence intentionally is the way Daniel entered it. You set aside the noise. You set aside the content consumption, and yes, I am aware of the irony of saying that in a video, but I mean it. You set aside the debates about timelines and the tracking of signs and the scrolling through prophetic commentary, and you get quiet before God. Not because quiet is comfortable, because the silence is where the censor is, because the silence is where the prayers ascend, because the silence is where Gabriel arrives. Practically, starting tonight, I want to challenge you to give God 30 minutes of silence every day between now and the next significant prophetic marker on the calendar. 30 minutes. The Hemiorian. The half hour. Not 30 minutes of worship music or sermon podcasts or even Bible reading. 30 minutes of actual silence before God. Prayer, confession, waiting. The posture of Daniel during the evening oblation. Let that be your first step. The second step is to let the knowledge drive you to confession, not just to conversation. This is the thing that separates Daniel from every other person in his generation who also knew the prophecy of Jeremiah. Daniel chapter 9 verse 3 says, "And I set my face unto the Lord God, to seek by prayer and supplications, with fasting and sackcloth and ashes." And then he spends the next 15 verses confessing, not his personal sins only, the sins of his people, the sins of the nation, the ways they had turned from God and not listened to the prophets and not walked in his laws. And I want to ask you something uncomfortable. When is the last time you confessed the sins of the church? Not just your personal failures, the collective failures, the ways the body of Christ has become comfortable and institutional and distracted and silent when it should have been speaking, the ways we have traded the posture of Daniel for the posture of the kings hiding in caves, explaining away the signs, making peace with the world, losing the urgency that the first Christians carried in their bones. 1 John chapter 1 verse 9 says, "If we confess our sins, he is faithful and just to forgive us our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness." That word confess in the Greek is homologio. It means to say the same thing, to agree with God about what is true, to stop defending and start agreeing. And the cleansing that follows is not just personal, it is the kind of cleansing that puts your prayers in the censer. That makes you the kind of person Gabriel flies toward. So the second step is this. Before you go to sleep tonight, write out a confession, not a list of things you feel bad about, a genuine agreement with God about the ways you have been hiding in caves instead of standing before the throne, about the ways you have consumed the signs without letting them change your posture, about the ways you have known the prophecy without living inside the urgency. Write it out, say the same thing God says about it, and then receive the cleansing that 1 John promises. The third step is to get your house in order before the trumpet sounds. And I mean that in the most practical and the most spiritual sense simultaneously. In the natural, I am talking about the things you already know you need to do, the relationships that need reconciliation, the conversations you have been putting off, the person whose face came into your mind while I was reading that passage about the prayers ascending in the censer. You know who that person is. You have known for a while. The silence is the interval, the Hemiorian, and the Hemiorian ends. Romans chapter 13 verses 11 through 12 says this, "And that, knowing the time, that now it is high time to awake out of sleep, for now is our salvation nearer than when we believed. The night is far spent, the day is at hand. Let us therefore cast off the works of darkness, and let us put on the armor of light." Cast off, that is not a gentle suggestion, that is a command. Cast off the works of darkness, the things you have been holding on to that you know do not belong in the life of someone whose prayers are in the censer, the compromises, the secret agreements with the world, the things you would be ashamed to have in your hands when the trumpet sounds. Cast them off, not gradually, not eventually, now, during the silence, while there is still a Hemiorian. And in the spiritual sense, getting your house in order means doing what Ephesians chapter 6 verses 13 through 14 commands. Put on the whole armor of God, and having done all, to stand, stand therefore. The posture of the great multitude in Revelation 7 is a standing posture. They are not sitting, they are not hiding, they are standing before the throne with palms in their hands, and the armor is what makes standing possible when everything around you is shaking. The fourth step is to find your people and stay close to them. Hebrews chapter 10 verses 24 and 25 says, "And let us consider one another to provoke unto love and to good works, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together, as the manner of some is, but exhorting one another, and so much the more, as ye see the day approaching." So much the more as ye see the day approaching. The writer of Hebrews is saying that the closer we get to the day, the more we need each other. Not less, more. And I think one of the most effective strategies of the enemy in this season has been isolation, has been convincing people that they can navigate the silence alone, that they can watch the signs from their individual screens and be ready without being in genuine community with other people who are watching and praying and standing. You cannot carry the weight of what the silence is asking of you alone. Daniel had companions. The great multitude was a multitude. The early church that Irenaeus belonged to was a community of people who ate together and prayed together and confessed to one another and held each other accountable to the posture that the urgency required. Find those people. If you do not have them, ask God to bring them to you during the silence. Ask Him specifically. Put that prayer in the censer, because the commandment goes forth at the beginning of the supplication, and the answer is already on its way. The fifth step is the one that everything else depends on, and it is the simplest and the hardest thing I am going to say tonight. Surrender everything. Not most things. Not the things you were already willing to give up. Everything. The plans you have made for your life that you have not submitted to God. The identity you have built that you are protecting. The version of the future you are holding on to that you have not placed in His hands. Everything. Because here is what the white robes in Revelation 7 represent. Revelation chapter 7 verse 14 tells us, "These are they which came out of great tribulation, and have washed their robes, and made them white in the blood of the Lamb." The white robes are not earned, they are washed. They are made white through surrender to the one whose blood makes the washing possible. And the people wearing them came out of great tribulation. They went through something. They did not avoid the difficulty. They went through it and came out the other side, standing before the throne. And I want to say something to you right now that I mean with everything in me. If you are watching this and you have never fully surrendered your life to Christ, not in a formulaic way, not in a repeat after me way, but in the way Daniel surrendered in sackcloth and ashes, in the way that costs you something, tonight is the night, not because I am telling you to, because the silence is telling you to, because the Hemiorean is telling you to, because the censer is open and the prayers are ascending and the commandment has already gone forth and the angel is already flying. Cry out to Him tonight. Not a polished prayer, not the right words, just the honest posture of a person who knows they cannot stand on their own and who is asking the one on the throne to receive them. That is all it takes. That is what puts your prayers in the censer. That is what puts you in the standing multitude instead of the hiding multitude. And if you are already His, if you have already surrendered, then let tonight be the night you surrender again, deeper, more completely, with less held back than last time. Because the silence is not a maintenance season. The silence is a preparation season, and preparation requires giving up the things that would slow you down when the trumpet sounds. Let me pray with you right now, and I want you to pray this with me, not as a formula, but as a genuine cry from wherever you are sitting right now. Father, I come to you during the silence. I come to you the way Daniel came, with confession and supplication and a heart that knows it needs you. I agree with you about the ways I have been hiding instead of standing. I agree with you about the things I have been holding that do not belong in my hands. I surrender them now. I surrender everything now. Receive my prayer as incense before your throne. Let it be in the censer. Let the commandment go forth on my behalf. And when the trumpet sounds, let me be found standing. Let me be found ready. Let me be found in white robes, not because I earned them, but because I came to the one whose blood makes the washing possible. I give you everything. Hold nothing back from you. In the name of Jesus, amen. If you prayed that just now, I want to know. Drop something in the comments. It does not have to be long. Just let me know you were here tonight. Let me know the silence found you, because every person who prays that prayer during the Hemiorean is a prayer in the censer, and I want to know who is in this with me. Now let me give you the summary of what we found tonight, because I want it to stay with you. We found that the silence in Revelation 8 verse 1 is not a pause in the action. It is the most loaded moment in the entire prophetic sequence. It is the CG, the verdict silence, the silence of a courtroom before the judge speaks. We found that during the silence, the prayers of the saints are gathered in a golden censer and offered before the throne, that the same censer is then filled with fire and cast to the earth, that the prayers become the answer, that the intercession becomes the response. We found that the Greek word hemiorion, used only once in the entire New Testament, carries the meaning of incompleteness, of half of something, of the first half of a two-part movement, and that this same hemistructure appears in Daniel chapter 9, verse 27, in the division of the final week, and in the writings of Irenaeus describing the 3.5 years before the coming of the Lord. We found that Gabriel arrived at Daniel during the evening oblation, during the silence, during the incense offering, and told him that the commandment had gone forth at the beginning of his supplication, that the answer was already in motion before the prayer was finished. And we found that the difference between the two groups in Revelation 6 and 7 is not knowledge, it is posture. One group hid, one group stood, and the standing group was the group whose prayers were in the censer. You already know who needs to hear this. Their face came into your mind while I was reading that passage about the prayers ascending before the throne. Send this to them tonight, not tomorrow. Tonight. Because what I showed you about the silence and the hemiorion and the commandment already going forth is not something they should find out about after the fact. Be the person who reaches them during the silence. Be the reason their prayer gets into the censer. It is 4:19 in the morning on March 12th, 2026. I have been at this desk for 5 hours and 32 minutes, and I am not tired. I am not tired because what I found in the text tonight is the kind of thing that makes sleep feel like a waste of the silence, the kind of thing that makes you want to stay at the desk and keep pulling the threads and keep following the cross-references and keep asking what else is in here that we have missed. And there is more. There is so much more, because what I found tonight in Revelation 8 is the entrance to something I have only begun to map, the connection between the 7 trumpets and the 7 feasts of Israel. The way the Feast of Trumpets, Rosh Hashanah, maps onto the trumpet sequence with a precision that will make your hands shake. The way 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 52, in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trump, connects to the feast calendar in a way that almost nobody is teaching right now. That is the next investigation, and I need you to be here for it. Because the silence is not the end of the story. The silence is the hinge, and what comes after the hinge is what everything has been building toward. Stay in the silence. Stay in position. Keep your prayers ascending. The commandment has already gone forth. The angel is already flying. And the one on the throne, the one who holds the censer, the one who said to Daniel, "Thou art greatly beloved," he sees you. He hears you. He has not gone quiet because he has gone absent. He has gone quiet because he is preparing to act. And when he acts, I want you to be standing.